Festival in Park City, Utah, this is Democracy Now!
For all their talk about election interference, that they're here to perpetrate the most massive interference in an election in American history, and we can't allow that to happen.
As President Trump's legal team accuses Democrats of trying to overturn an election, former National Security Advisor John Bolton reveals in an unpublished book manuscript that Trump personally told him he was freezing military assistance to Ukraine until Ukraine helped investigate Trump's political rival, Joe Biden. Will the Senate call Bolton and other witnesses to testify? We'll get the latest. Then, as Democrats make the case to remove the president Friday, just blocks away at the National Mall, Trump, who once described himself as pro-choice in every respect, became the first sitting president to address the annual so-called March for Life in Washington.
We're here for a very simple reason: to defend the right of every child, born and unborn, to fulfill their God-given potential.
Then Ours to Tell, a new short film created by Planned Parenthood, is challenging the stigma surrounding abortion.
To people who are seeking abortion services, you are not alone. There isn't anything wrong with you. You deserve compassionate care. You deserve loving relationships. And basketball legend Kobe Bryant dies in a helicopter crash with his 13-year-old daughter and 7 others. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As the historic impeachment trial of President Donald Trump continues this week, explosive new revelations about Trump's decision to freeze aid to Ukraine emerged Sunday. The New York Times reports former National Security Advisor John Bolton writes in his forthcoming book that Trump personally told him in August that he wanted to continue withholding nearly $400 million in security aid until Ukraine turned over materials related to former Vice President Joe Biden and supporters of Hillary Clinton in Ukraine. The reports are based on a leaked manuscript of Bolton's book. Trump took to Twitter shortly after midnight Monday to deny the claims, writing, quote, "I never told John Bolton that the aid to Ukraine was tied to investigations into Democrats, including the Bidens. In fact, he never complained about this at the time of his very public termination. If John Bolton said this, it was only to sell a book," Trump tweeted. This comes as Trump's defense team is resuming their opening arguments today after using just 2 hours of their allotted 24 hours on Saturday. White House counsel Pat Cipollone argued Trump's July phone call with the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, did not explicitly tie aid to the investigations and accused Democrats of trying to, quote, overturn the results of the last election. This is Trump's longtime personal lawyer, Jay Sekulow, speaking on the Senate floor Saturday.
We really intend to show over the next several days that the evidence is actually really overwhelming, that the president did nothing wrong. This case is really not about presidential wrongdoing. This entire impeachment process is about the House manager's insistence that they are able to read everybody's thoughts, they can read everybody's intention, even when the principal speakers, the witnesses themselves, insist that those interpretations are wrong.
Senators are preparing to vote this week on whether new evidence and witnesses can be introduced in Trump's Senate impeachment trial. 4 Republicans would need to side with Democrats and vote in favor of the move. We'll have more on the impeachment trial after headlines with Mother Jones reporter Dan Friedman. The coronavirus outbreak continues to spread, with the death toll now rising to at least 81 people in China. Nearly 60 million people are now on partial or full lockdown. Entire cities have been essentially quarantined, with residents unable to travel outside of a government-designated area. The mayor and top government officials in the city of Wuhan, which is at the center of the outbreak, have offered to resign in the face of criticism that the early response to the outbreak was too slow. Wuhan is now attempting to build a 1,000-bed hospital in just 10 days to treat infected patients. Hong Kong has shut down schools for several weeks. Nearly 3,000 cases of the disease have been identified around the world, though the number is expected to rise. 5 cases have been confirmed in the United States. The Pentagon said Friday 34 American military members sustained traumatic brain injuries from Iranian airstrikes on the Al-Assad air base in Iraq earlier this month. President Trump had previously said no American troops were injured in the attack, which came in response to the targeted U.S. killing of top Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. Trump dismissed concerns about the troops' well-being last week, saying he thought their injuries were headaches and were not very serious. Paul Rieckhoff, the founder of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, called out the misinformation about the troops' injuries, tweeting, "This is a big deal. The American people must be able to trust the government to share information about our sons and daughters in harm's way. Nothing is more serious and sacred," Rieckhoff said. In Iraq, security forces and unidentified gunmen attacked anti-government protesters over the weekend, reportedly killing 12 people and burning protest camps in Baghdad and the southern city of Nasiriyah.
Unidentified men came from that direction in 4 large vehicles and 2 other cars and started firing randomly at protesters. I was in my car and my son was sitting beside me. The bullets hit the car, came through the car's windshield, out through the rear glass.
Up to 600 protesters have been killed since the demonstrations erupted in Iraq in October. Protesters say the latest crackdown came after popular Shia cleric Muqtada al-Sadr announced Friday he would no longer support the anti-government demonstrations. Earlier on Friday, 200,000 people took part in a march in Baghdad supported by al-Sadr, demanding the U.S. withdraw troops from Iraq following the assassination of General Soleimani at Baghdad International Airport. In Turkey, a 6.8 magnitude earthquake has killed at least 38 people and injured at least 1,600 others. The powerful quake hit the eastern province of Elazig on Friday, trapping scores of people and collapsing at least 76 buildings. Over 40 people have been rescued from the rubble, including a 2-year-old girl. Tremors could be felt as far as Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. Ugandan climate activist Vanessa Nakate is speaking out against racism in the media after she was cropped out of a photo featuring herself and other prominent climate activists in Davos, Switzerland. The other young activists were white and included Greta Thunberg. The Associated Press, which published the cropped photo, said the photographer cut Nakate out of it because he thought the building behind her was distracting. Vanessa Nakate said the move, quote, erased a continent. This is Nakate speaking on social media.
This is the first time in my life that I understood the definition of the word racism. Africa is the least emitter of carbons, but we are the most affected by the climate crisis. But you erasing our voices won't change anything.
To see our interview with Vanessa Nakate at last month's UN Climate Summit in Madrid, go to DemocracyNow.org. President Trump became the first sitting president to attend and address the anti-abortion March for Life march in Washington, D.C. Friday. He told supporters, quote, unborn children have never had a stronger defender in the White House, unquote, as he touted his judicial appointments and slammed Democrats, falsely accusing Virginia Governor Ralph Northam of supporting a bill that would execute babies after birth. Also on Friday, the Trump administration threatened to cut off federal funding for some health programs in California unless the state ends its requirement that private health insurers cover abortion. California Governor Gavin Newsom said the state would not change its policy. Meanwhile, Education Secretary Betsy DeVos is coming under fire for comparing the Trump administration's fight to ban abortion to the fight to end slavery. The Education Secretary said, quote, President Lincoln, too, contended with the pro-choice arguments of his day. They suggested a state's choice to be slave or to be free had no moral question in it. President Lincoln reminded those pro-choicers that a vast portion of the American people look upon it as a vast moral evil, unquote. Betsy DeVos made the comments at an event last week for Colorado Christian University held at the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. Massachusetts Congressmember Ayanna Pressley tweeted in response, quote, "As a black woman in the chair of the Abortion Access Task Force, I invite you to come by the Hill and say this to my face. Would welcome the opportunity to educate you," she said, addressing the Education Secretary, Betsy DeVos. In Boston, the founder of Insys Therapeutics has been sentenced to 5.5 years in prison in a landmark case for the opioid crisis. John Kapoor and 4 other executives were convicted last May of a criminal conspiracy to bribe doctors to prescribe a highly addictive fentanyl spray to patients who didn't need it. One of the defendants allegedly gave a lap dance to a doctor at a company event in order to persuade him to prescribe the drug. Legal experts say the sentencing should be a warning to other drug company executives who've engaged in deceptive marketing practices and other schemes to push opioids. In New York City, a fire has destroyed tens of thousands of art pieces and historical material belonging to the Museum of Chinese in America. The fire erupted Thursday night on the eve of Lunar New Year and tore through the archives of the iconic Chinatown Museum, which contained one-of-a-kind documents dating back to the 1800s, chronicling the history of Chinese migration to the United States. In Texas, an explosion in an industrial plant early Friday morning killed 2 people, damaged over 200 homes northwest of Houston. Authorities are investigating the cause of the blast at the Watson Grinding and Manufacturing Plant. 2 workers of the company were killed in the explosion, which was so powerful it shattered windows and homes up to a half-mile away. And basketball superstar Kobe Bryant died Sunday in a helicopter crash in Los Angeles at the age of 41. The crash killed all 9 people on board, including Kobe Bryant's 13-year-old daughter, Gianna, or Gigi, beloved college baseball coach John Altobelli and his wife, Kerry, and their 13-year-old daughter, Alyssa. Officials say the cause of the crash is being investigated but could take months to determine. Bryant won 5 NBA championships, 2 Olympic gold medals, and was crowned an All-Star 18 times. He played for the LA Lakers for 20 years before retiring in 2016. He was also known for being an ardent supporter of women's basketball. His daughter, Gianna, reportedly hoped to one day play for the University of Connecticut women's basketball team. Tributes continue to pour in on social media from fans, athletes, and other public figures. Musicians Alicia Keys, Lizzo, Run DMC, and others remembered Bryant at the Grammys in Los Angeles Sunday night, and thousands gathered outside the Staples Center overnight to mourn his passing. But some are also calling on the media and supporters not to forget a sexual assault allegation from early in his career. In 2003, a 19-year-old hotel worker where Bryant was staying in Colorado accused him of rape. Bryant denied the charge, saying they had a consensual sexual encounter. The case was dropped after the woman decided not to testify, and a civil suit was settled out of court. Many have called out his accuser's treatment by the media and Bryant's defense team. The sexual assault allegations resurfaced in 2018 when his film Dear Basketball won an Oscar for Best Animated Short at the 2018 Academy Awards. We'll have more on Kobe Bryant later in the broadcast with author and sports journalist Dave Zirin. And as well, those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Calls are growing for the Senate to call witnesses in President Trump's impeachment trial after the New York Times published details about former National Security Advisor John Bolton's forthcoming book. In an unpublished draft of the book, Bolton writes that President Trump personally told him in August that he wanted to maintain a freeze on $391 million in security assistance to Ukraine until Ukraine turned over materials related to former Vice President Joe Biden and supporters of Hillary Clinton in Ukraine. Bolton sent a draft of the book to the White House for review in December. The Democratic House impeachment managers issued a statement saying, quote, "There can be no doubt now that Mr. Bolton directly contradicts the heart of the president's defense and therefore must be called as a witness at the impeachment trial of President Trump," unquote. The New York Times broke the story Sunday, one day after President Trump's legal team began its defense of the president at the impeachment trial. During Saturday's opening arguments, White House Deputy Counsel Mike Purpura claimed the Democratic case for impeachment is based on assumptions.
In his public testimony, Ambassador Sondland used variations of the words assume, presume, guess, speculate, and belief over 30 times. Here are some examples.
That was my presumption, my personal presumption. That was my belief. That was my presumption, yeah.
Is that
I said I presume that might have to be done in order to get the aid released. It was a presumption. I've been very clear as to when I was presuming, and I was presuming on the aid. It would be pure, guesswork on my part, speculation. I don't know. That was the problem, Mr. Goldman. No one told me directly that the aid was tied to anything. I was presuming it was.
All the Democrats have to support the alleged link between security assistance and investigations is Ambassador Sondland's assumptions and presumptions.
During Saturday's opening argument, Trump's attorney, Pat Cipollone, accused the Democrats of attempting to overturn an election.
For all their talk about election interference, that they're here to perpetrate the most massive interference in an election in American history, and we can't allow that to happen. It would violate our Constitution. It would violate our history. It would violate our obligations to the future.
Trump's lawyers will continue their opening arguments today. On Friday, the Democratic House impeachment managers wrapped up their 3 days of opening arguments. This is Democratic Congress member Adam Schiff, the chair of the House Intelligence Committee.
But let's just try to step into someone else's shoes for a moment. Let's imagine it wasn't Joe Biden. Let's imagine it was any one of us. Let's imagine the most powerful person in the world was asking a foreign nation to conduct a sham investigation into one of us. What would we think about it then? Would we think that's good U.S. policy? Would we think he has every right to do it? Would we think that's a perfect call? It shouldn't have mattered that it was Marie Yovanovitch. It shouldn't matter that it was Joe Biden. Because I'll tell you something, the next time, it just may be you.
To talk more about the Senate impeachment trial, we're joined by Dan Friedman, reporter in Mother Jones' D.C. bureau, who focuses on foreign influence and national security. His recent piece is headlined, "Trump's legal team opened their impeachment defense with a blizzard of lies." And I want to go into that, Dan, but first, this latest news that has just been released over the last 24 hours, the New York Times saying that Bolton, in his book Manuscript, has said that Trump directly told him that he was withholding military aid to Ukraine unless they would investigate the Bidens and as well. If you can talk about this, the significance of this.
Yeah, I think, a key argument that Trump's lawyers have made is that there is no evidence, as I think some of your clips showed, they have argued that there is no evidence indicating that Trump linked the hold on aid to Ukraine to his push for Ukraine to announce these investigations that would help him politically. And Trump has also said that the aid was not related to his wish for investigations. So Bolton's manuscript, as reported by the Times, completely blows up that claim. It falsifies the sort of key crux claim of their defense of him so far. So it's hard to overestimate how bad it is for Trump's defense. I would also point out that Mick Mulvaney, in public testimony, the White House chief of staff, in his press conference that he had back in October, also said that he had direct conversations with Trump, in which Trump linked the hold on aid to wanting Ukraine to announce investigations. So we shouldn't forget that also Mulvaney could be a witness connecting the push for aid to investigations. So the Senate is going to have an opportunity to vote on whether they want to subpoena Bolton, Mulvaney, and others. And obviously, the report from the Times makes that vote a lot harder from Republicans if they're going to try to continue to suppress this evidence.
So talk about what this means and what Republicans you see. I mean, we'll see today will be, as they're confronted with what Bolton is going to say, and then also address the issue of executive privilege that President Trump will try to make. And does that protect, is it a broad shield, or can that be challenged? And if Bolton himself, if subpoenaed, wants to testify, whether or not Trump invokes executive privilege, can he say what he wants?
I think the short answer is they can assert executive privilege. If the Senate subpoenas him, there is, for information that he has already reportedly put in the manuscript of a book that is going to be published for anyone to read. And of course, there's still a review process for that. But nevertheless, it is a very difficult argument for them to make. And I think ultimately it's a political question. So they can attempt to assert executive privilege. But with the Senate subpoena and Bolton wanting to testify, it's very difficult to suppress that information. The other point that I would make is Trump, in his tweet in which he denied that he had told Bolton that he wanted to hold the aid to force the investigations, is making the case for why Bolton should be subpoenaed. If Trump is saying Bolton is lying, that is a very strong argument for why Bolton should be put under oath under penalty of perjury and asked whether it is true that Trump made this connection. So, you know, the Republicans are going to have a hard time keeping Bolton from testifying, and I'm sure that they'll try.
So, Dan, let's go to what happened on Saturday. The Democratic House managers wrapped up their arguments on Friday. Talk about the gist of what you call the blizzard of lies, what the Trump defense team said in their first day of arguments, and how little time they actually used.
Yeah, they did it all in just a few hours, and they managed to make a lot of claims that are false or deeply misleading. One of the claims, which was in the clips you played, was that there was no link established between the hold on aid and investigations by Ukraine. One problem with that we just talked about is that Bolton has now contradicted that. Another problem with that is that they simply ignored that there was testimony by Gordon Sondland, who they were quoting, linking a refusal to have a White House meeting with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky to trying to force him to have these investigations that would help Trump politically. So Sondland, elsewhere in his testimony, said there was a quid pro quo. Famously, it was a big deal. There was a quid pro quo. I am sure of that, linking a White House meeting to investigations. And they, you know, Trump's lawyers didn't say, well, don't pay attention to that. It's not as important. They just literally ignored it. So I think that goes to sort of the veracity of their argument overall. Another argument they made is that the Ukrainians were not aware of the hold on aid until, I think, September. That also ignored public statements by the former deputy foreign minister from Ukraine, who said we did know about it, and also testimony by Laura Cooper, who's a Defense Department official, who said that she also heard the Ukrainians were concerned about the hold on aid back in July. In both cases, they're saying they knew about it in July. So those are, I think, two big examples, but you know there are a whole bunch of others. They said that there's they talked about the call that Trump had with Zelensky and repeatedly referred to it, the transcript of the call. I think anybody who's paid attention to that knows it's not actually a transcript. There may be important parts of that testimony, that conversation that are not included in that memorandum of the conversation. It's a summary of what people who are listening remember. So there was just a lot of false and misleading claims that to pick through if you were watching on Saturday.
Can you talk more about ABC News obtaining that recording of what appears to show President Trump saying that he wanted the then U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, fired after speaking at a private gathering that included Lev Parnas? Let me go to that. Let me go, before you respond, Dan, to that clip.
Germany's going behind our...
Germany's not doing
They're supporting Russia. They're supporting Russia.
You think so?
Oh, 100%.
2 billion to pay Russia.
100%. 100%.
It just makes no sense.
It doesn't, exactly. It doesn't make sense.
Poroshenko needs support from you.
A lot of the European countries, they're backstabbing us basically and dealing with Russia, and that's why you're having such. I think if you take a look, the biggest problem there, I think where we need to start is we got to get rid of the ambassador. She's still left over from the Clinton administration.
Where the ambassador, where Ukraine?
Yeah, and she's basically walking around telling everybody, wait, he's going to get impeached. Just wait. I mean,
Really?
it's incredible. It's like,
She'll be gone tomorrow. What's her name?
I don't remember the name. But
So one of the things that will be, now that we have a Secretary of State that's been sworn in.
Get rid of her.
Hooray. One of the first things
Get her out
that
tomorrow.
will,
I don't care. Get her out tomorrow. Take her out, okay?
Excellent.
Do it.
Excellent.
So that video was obtained from Lev Parnas's attorney, Joseph Bondi. It begins with Trump posing for photos, then entering a private dining room, and halfway through the recording, one of the participants suggests Yovanovitch is posing problems, and you can hear Trump saying, get rid of her, get her out tomorrow, I don't care, get her out tomorrow, take her out, okay, do it. And then the video, it's sort of showing the ceiling. But Dan, just explain this whole thing.
Yeah, I think number one, Parnas and the guy who took the video, Igor Fruman, are associates of Rudy Giuliani, and they were kind of running around Ukraine as Parnas claimed he was acting as an emissary of Giuliani, and then since Giuliani is Trump's personal lawyer, an emissary of Trump himself, attempting to effectuate this scheme to get Ukraine to have these investigations, and as part of that, excuse me, to get Marie Yovanovitch fired, the ambassador to Ukraine. President Trump has said that he doesn't know Lev Parnas or Igor Fruman. So I think quite clearly he is lying when he says he doesn't know them. Here's a video of them having a private meeting with him. And that's not all. There's pictures of them together on other occasions. I think another important point about this meeting, which occurred in May of 2018 at the Trump Hotel, is that Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman were there because they had pledged to give $1 million to a super PAC supporting Trump. They wound up giving a few weeks later $325,000 through a shell company that they set up in Delaware. So that is, I think, in many people's assessment, pretty corrupt, that they are able to influence U.S. policy toward Ukraine, which is in a war, of course, because they pledged $1 million to Trump's super PAC and gave $325,000. In addition, they have been indicted in Manhattan for campaign finance violations that include allegations that they accepted money from foreign sources, including an unnamed Russian businessman, and used that money to make campaign donations in the United States to influence the U.S. political system. So we don't know that this particular donation came from a foreign source, but we don't know that it didn't. And it certainly creates the suspicion that foreign interests for possibly someone in Ukraine who is concerned that Marie Yovanovitch was an ardent opponent of corruption and therefore was making it harder to do some kind of potentially corrupt business. A person like that could quite easily be influencing U.S. policy toward Ukraine through Parnas and Fruman in this case. And I think one thing it shows is that there is a lot more investigation to be done, whether it's by the House, by the Senate, by the Department of Justice, to figure out what was going on, particularly since these events occurred a year before, a little more than a year before most of the action that is at issue in the impeachment trial.
And finally, if you can just comment quickly in 30 seconds on what some have called the Epstein Dream Team, his team defending him being Ken Starr and Alan Dershowitz.
Yeah, so Ken Starr and Alan Dershowitz are both, of course, very famous lawyers, and I think that obviously the significant thing about Starr was that he oversaw the investigation into Bill Clinton's relationship with Monica Lewinsky and related issues. And Alan Dershowitz was a member of O.J. Simpson's Dream Team who helped get him acquitted for murder. Both of them have previously made arguments that are departures from what they will presumably be arguing this afternoon. Dershowitz has said that you do not have to have committed a crime to be impeached. Today, Dershowitz has indicated that he will make the opposite argument. Ken Starr, who was forced out of a job at Baylor University because the football team had a sexual harassment scandal, will be arguing against Trump's removal from office as well. That's obviously inconsistent with Starr's position when he was going after Clinton. They will be, I think, really trying to make the case to the public, and I think it is worth keeping in mind that even though their legal arguments may be dubious, they are going to be trying to give Republican senators and Trump supporters something to hang their hat on in terms of saying he shouldn't be removed.
Well, Dan Friedman, I want to thank you for being with us. Reporter Mother Jones' D.C. Bureau, focusing on foreign policy and national security, covering Trump's impeachment trial. We'll link to your piece. Trump's legal team opened their impeachment defense with a blizzard of lies. When we come back, basketball legend Kobe Bryant dies in a helicopter crash with his 13-year-old daughter and 7 others. We'll speak with the nation's Dave Zirin and Fatima Goss-Graves. Stay with us. The Buzz, instrumental by Madlib. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. Basketball superstar Kobe Bryant died Sunday in a helicopter crash near Los Angeles at the age of 41. The crash killed all 9 people on board, including Bryant's 13-year-old daughter, Gianna, known as Gigi, and the beloved college baseball coach, John Altobelli, and his wife, Carrie, and their 13-year-old daughter, Alyssa. They were all heading to a youth basketball game. Bryant won 5 NBA championships, 2 Olympic gold medals, was crowned an All-Star 18 times. He played for the LA Lakers for 20 years before retiring in 2016, also known for being an ardent supporter of women's basketball. Gigi Bryant reportedly hoped to one day play for the University of Connecticut women's basketball team. Tributes continue to pour in on social media from fans, athletes, and other public figures. Musicians Alicia Keys and Lizzo remembered Kobe Bryant at the Grammys in Los Angeles Sunday night. Thousands gathered outside the Staples overnight, the Staples Center, to mourn his passing. But some are also calling on the media and supporters not to forget the sexual assault allegation from early in his career. In 2003, a 19-year-old woman who worked at a hotel where Kobe Bryant was staying in Colorado accused him of rape. Bryant denied the charge, saying they had a consensual encounter. Authorities said the woman had injuries, quote, not consistent with consensual sex. His blood was also found on his T-shirt. The case was dropped after the woman decided not to testify, and a civil suit was settled out of court. In a statement, Bryant said in a 2004 quote, after months of reviewing discovery, listening to her attorney, and even her testimony in person, I now understand how she feels that she did not consent to this encounter, unquote. The sexual assault allegations resurfaced in 2018 when Kobe Bryant's film Dear Basketball won an Oscar for Best Animated Short at the 2018 Academy Awards. Well, we're joined now by 2 people. Dave Zirin, sports editor at The Nation magazine, also host of the Edge of Sports podcast, and Fatima Goss-Graves, president and CEO of the National Women's Law Center, among the co-founders of the Time's Up Legal Defense Fund. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Dave, why don't you start off by just talking about who Kobe Bryant was?
Well, no, absolutely. Hello, Amy. I think what people need to remember, particularly Democracy Now! Listeners who don't quite understand the scale of grief and outpouring that's taking place right now, is that Kobe Bryant first became part of the public consciousness at age 17 as a high school senior, and he dies yesterday at the age of 41. That means for over half of Kobe Bryant's life, he's part of the public eye, and I think there's this tremendous association that people had with him and with his career. I mean, Kobe Bryant was the kind of player that people felt passionate about. Some people loved him, some people hated him, some people loved and hated him for things that happened on the court, some people for what happened off the court. But over the course of his career, he not only excelled as a player, you know, he was an 18-time All-Star, for goodness sakes, but he was also very much a global athlete. His name was Kobe because his father was a basketball player named Joe Bryant who traveled the world, and Kobe was named after Kobe, Japan, where Kobe played. Kobe grew up in Italy. He spoke fluent Italian. He spoke Spanish. There's a basketball player named Luka Doncic, and Kobe would speak to him in Slovenian. So Kobe had this global appeal, which has led to this outpouring of grief that we see today. And for a lot of folks, as you know, people just thought the second act of Kobe's life was just getting started at age 41. And I think when you factor in the death of Gigi as well, who had aspirations to be a basketball player in her own right, it's almost like this future that people saw for Kobe was just erased in the blink of an eye. And I think that's what people are suffering with right now.
And can you talk more about his daughter, Gigi, who was also beloved and really got him into women's basketball? He said he wasn't even watching it after he finished in 2016, after he retired.
Well, he wasn't watching any basketball after he finished. He wanted to be the sort of athlete who didn't hang around the game, but instead moved on to other challenges and other jobs. He wanted to be a big creative producer out in Hollywood and a mogul, really. And a lot of players were looking to Kobe to blaze that path as a mogul. But then his daughter became a basketball obsessive, not unlike her dad, you know, obsessive in the best possible sense, just an absolute lover of the game. And that brought Kobe back into the game, particularly into the sphere of women's basketball. He became a girls' basketball coach. He became someone who just this past last month made news where he talked about that there are women who should be playing in the NBA right now, and that he was going to be someone who took it upon himself to champion the WNBA going forward. And Gigi was part of those dreams. There's this amazing clip that's going around of Kobe on a talk show, and about someone coming up to Kobe and Gigi and saying to him, oh, it would be amazing if you had a son, because your son could carry on your legacy. And Gigi actually stepping in and interrupting the conversation and saying, no, I got this.
And of course, Gigi died in that helicopter crash as well. Can you talk now about what happened in 2003, Dave Zirin? What happened in Colorado?
Well, I'll be frank with you. First and foremost, it's difficult to discuss because you want to give people space to mourn right now. And I feel like there is going to be time to discuss all of this. But I also understand that this is part of Kobe's legacy, and it does need to be discussed. In 2003, Kobe was charged with sexual assault. In 2005, the charges were dropped when his accuser did not testify. And Kobe's lawyers absolutely engaged in a scorched earth campaign against his accuser that was so intense they actually changed the rape shield laws in Colorado because they were so vicious towards her. Now, part of the settlement the part of the deal that Kobe, in terms of the civil suit of writing a very large check to make the charges go away, involved Kobe writing out an apology that was read in court, where Kobe acknowledged that he did not think that his accuser had offered consent in their encounter. And I have to tell you, like, I was speaking with, back then in 2005, that hadn't really been seen before. I mean, and now I think it doesn't, I don't know how we would look at it in 2020 in our era today, but in 2005, offering that statement where he spoke about the issue of consent. I know that for a lot of organizations that work in restorative justice circles, they've used that statement as a way to speak about the importance of understanding consent and the importance of fighting sexual assault and rape culture.
So I'd like to bring in Fatima Goss-Graves here, President and CEO of the National Women's Law Center. Going back to that 2003 moment in Colorado where the woman, authorities said, had injuries not consistent with consensual sex, her blood found on Kobe Bryant's T-shirt, and then that statement in the settlement that he made in 2004 after months of reviewing discovery, listening to her attorney, and even her testimony in person. I now understand how she feels that she did not consent to this encounter. If you can share your thoughts today on Kobe Bryant's legacy.
Well, I should begin by offering my condolence to his family, to his friends. I was in college in LA when he first came to the Lakers, and it all seems too soon. And at the same time, we have to think about how it is that we talk about legacies. It's often too easy to erase the bad parts of legacy. But in this moment, it's especially important that we contextualize everything about his legacy on and off the court, including the sexual violence where the page was probably turned too soon. I hope 15 years later, when we think about this instance, we can think about it a little bit differently. We can think about how it is survivors are feeling in this moment as well.
Dave Zirin, your final thoughts.
Stuff so beautifully and so eloquently. I have little to add except that I think it's very important that we keep in mind today and hold to our hearts the Bryant family, the Altobelli family, survivors, and everybody who is processing this grief in their own way. It's important that we not police people's grief. It's important instead that we listen to what everybody has to say, because this is something that's affecting people in a way that's far broader than basketball.
Well, I want to thank you both for being with us. And Fatima Goss-Graves, you're going to be staying with us as we talk about what's happened in this last week with the first sitting president in history to attend and address an anti-choice march, the major so-called March for Life in Washington. Dave Zirin, thanks for being with us, sports editor for The Nation magazine. Fatima Goss-Graves, president of the National Women's Law Center. Stay with us.
Il me prend dans ses bras, il me parle tout bas, je vois la vie en rose. Il me dit des mots d'amour, des mots de tous les jours, et ça me fait quelque chose. Il est entré dans mon cœur, une part de bonheur dont je connais la cause. C'est lui pour moi, moi pour lui aujourd'hui. Il me l'a dit, là je réponds la vie. Et dès que je l'aperçois, alors je sens en moi mon cœur qui bat.
Democracy Now! This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We are broadcasting from Park City, Utah. On Friday, Democrats let me talk about what happened this past week as we turn to the fight for reproductive rights, as the Trump administration launched an all-out assault on abortion. On Friday, Democrats made the case for his removal from office in the Senate. Just blocks away, President Trump became the first sitting president in U.S. history to attend and address the annual so-called March for Life on the National Mall.
It is my profound honor to be the first president in history to attend the March for Life. We're here for a very simple reason: to defend the right of every child, born and unborn, to fulfill their God-given potential.
I don't hear anything. President Trump, who once described himself as pro-choice in every respect, accused Democrats of infanticide and falsely stated that Virginia Governor Ralph Northam supports an abortion bill that would, quote, execute a baby after birth. The annual anti-abortion march began in 1974 in response to the landmark 1973 Supreme Court case ruling Roe v. Wade, which guaranteed the constitutional right to abortion. Past U.S. presidents who opposed abortion considered the march too extreme and divisive to attend and instead sent a surrogate or joined by a video message. The same day Trump addressed anti-abortion activists in Washington, his administration threatened to cut off some federal funding to California unless the state ends its requirement that private health insurers cover abortion. California Governor Gavin Newsom said the state would not change its policy. This followed Education Secretary Betsy DeVos comparing the anti-abortion movement to the fight to end slavery. She reportedly told a crowd at the Museum of the Bible in Washington, quote, Lincoln, too, contended with the pro-choice arguments of his day. They suggested a state's choice to be slave or to be free had no moral question in it. Lincoln was right about the slavery choice then, and he would be right about the life choice today. She went on to tell the audience that she wants to make abortion, quote, unconstitutional and unthinkable. In response, Massachusetts Congressmember Ayanna Pressley tweeted, quote, Dear Betsy, as a black woman and the chair of the Abortion Access Task Force, I invite you to come by the Hill and say this to my face. Would welcome the opportunity to educate you, Pressley said. Well, for more, still with us in Washington, D.C., Fatima Goss-Graves, president and CEO of the National Women's Law Center. Can you talk about President Trump setting precedent here, the first sitting president to address the so-called March for Life in Washington and its significance?
Well, there's a reason that no other sitting president had actually attended that march. It is so outside the mainstream, and it is filled with hateful rhetoric around women, about reproductive justice. That's why they haven't actually shown up in person. And it also is a focal point. So it's a time to sort of amp up the rhetoric, which we saw all last week, and deliver harmful policy. So this is all happening in the context, of course, of impeachment, but it's really, really sending a dangerous precedent going forward.
I want to turn to Tim Russert interviewing Donald Trump in 1999 when he was considering a presidential run on the Reform Party ticket.
Partial birth abortion, the eliminating of abortion in the third trimester, big issue in Washington. Would President Trump ban partial birth abortion?
Well, look, I'm very pro-choice. I hate the concept of abortion. I hate it. I hate everything it stands for. I cringe when I listen to people debating the subject. But I just believe in choice. And again, it may be a little bit of a New York background because there is some different attitude in different parts of the country. And, you know, I was raised in New York and grew up and work and everything else in New York City. But I am strongly for choice, and yet I hate the concept of abortion.
But you would not ban it?
No.
Or ban partial birth abortion?
No, I am pro-choice in every respect and as far as it goes, but I just hate it.
So that was President Trump in 1999. Fatima Goss-Graves, talk about the significance. I mean, he's saying, I am pro-choice in every way, and now he's the first sitting president ever to address the March for Life march in Washington.
Right, what a difference 2 decades makes in terms of his ability to play to his base. That's what this is about. The irony is 7 in 10 people do not want to see Roe versus Wade overturned. So he is now out of step with the majority of people and has moved away from where most people are, both in 1999, but certainly where they are right now.
If you could then go to what happened on Wednesday, where the Education Secretary, Betsy DeVos, says she wants to make abortion unconstitutional and unthinkable and compared abortion to slavery.
It's outrageous. I mean, it is both it's outrageous to really compare anything to slavery, but it's outrageous to especially compare abortion to slavery. In order to do so, you have to fully ignore a key feature of slavery, which was reproductive coercion. Both the rape that Black women endured, the forced pregnancy, the forced childbirth, and then they could not even determine whether and how or where their children were raised. So the insult of actually comparing abortion to slavery is just absurd for this secretary. If the secretary was actually concerned about addressing the badges of slavery, she has the full authority to do so with her role as Secretary of Education. She could be dismantling the school-to-prison pipeline. She could be focusing on inequities by race and by gender in school. You know, it is this March for Life that allowed them to heap up this rhetoric this week, and this rhetoric itself is dangerous.
And then the significance of what is taking place now in California. I mean, it looks like a few weeks ago, as the impeachment trial was about to happen, you have President Trump assassinating the Iranian leader, Qasem Soleimani. Now, as the impeachment trial is in full progress, unexpectedly for many, he announces he's going to speak at the march, and then he goes after California. Can you talk about the significance of saying they'll cut federal funding for some programs if California continues to require private insurers to cover abortion?
I should begin by saying that there's no basis in law for him to do this thing. And the private insurers have said they don't have a problem covering abortion. The only people who have a problem with it are President Trump and his need to sort of ramp up the rhetoric this week, and people who are not insurance bosses, basically, that want to take away the right to have abortion care covered by insurance plans. But the results of this are going to be terrible for the state of California if it actually were to go through. He's basically threatening to hold hostage billions of dollars that go to providing health care, dollars that actually are going to provide things like reducing maternal mortality, dealing with pregnancy in the full range of services that people need. So these are harmful threats. They are both anti-women and anti-life, and they are only coming out right now because of a need to rally up a base.
Well, Fatima Goss-Graves, what ultimately gives you hope at this point? We're in Utah. The legislature today is considering major cases around the so-called heartbeat bill. It's often seen as a testing ground for the rest of the country. And yet you see tremendous grassroots activism, which we're going to talk about right now in a moment.
Listen, we are in this really interesting point in history where 7 in 10 people do not want to see Roe versus Wade overturned. And at the same time, we have politicians who are trying to rally up their base and really roll back our rights in ways that are dangerous. So now is not the time for people to sit on the sidelines on this issue. People understand that our lives and our futures are really at stake. And as states race to do things like ban abortion, to really do things that put people in dangerous situations, it's time for everyone to come on the sidelines, as we saw that happen last year. What we know is that they're doing things that go directly against our Constitution. They are not found valid under the law, and we have fortunately had courts saying that again and again. But what we really read right now is also the people power to remind people that 7 in 10 people do not want these steps to be taken.
Well, I want to thank you, Fatima Goss-Graves, President and CEO of the National Women's Law Center, who just flew from Park City, Utah, back to Washington, D.C. We're going to turn now to a new short film that's challenging the stigma surrounding abortion through the stories of 4 people reflecting on their own decisions to terminate a pregnancy. It's called Ours to Tell. This is the film's trailer.
20 on Dig Brick Out.
This is a plea for love and for freedom. That each of us is free not only to dream our best life, but that we have the freedom to live it.
Hey, Taylor. Hi.
This is a demand for an end to judgment, an end to stigma, an end to silence, and an end to shame.
Ours to Tell was directed by Reka Zatapchi and created by Planned Parenthood and We Testify. We're joined now here in Park City, Utah, by Renee Bracey Sherman, founder and executive director of We Testify, the film's executive producer. Welcome to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us.
Thank you so much.
So you're with We Testify. Explain your group.
Yeah, so our organization is dedicated to the leadership and representation of people who've had abortions. For too long, we have not been seen as the experts in the conversation about abortion. We've been left out. We've been kind of thought of as this abstract idea. And we're the ones who are having abortions. We should be talking about it. And we should be represented with respect on television and in the news.
And talk about your own experience.
Yeah, so I had an abortion when I was 19. I was in an unsafe relationship, and I simply didn't feel like I was ready to become a parent. And I was lucky. At that point, I could just drive to the clinic 15 minutes from my home. I maxed out a credit card to pay for it, and the procedure took all of 10 minutes. But the reality is today that most people have to travel long distances. They have a hard time paying for their abortions. And it's simply inaccessible, despite it being legal. And that's what we're hoping to bring light to and show that people are having challenges in accessing it.
I wanted to go to another clip of Ours to Tell, where each of the 4 people featured in the film reflects on why they chose to terminate their pregnancy.
So these are some things that I wrote when I was 18 years old. I believe that any person has freedom to do what they would like to their own body. And if timing is not right or the mother is not ready, then she should have the right to choose whether she would like to have a child or not, just as I did.
I found out I was pregnant in May. Something in me was always just like, no, girl, this ain't it, and you can move beyond it somehow.
I just remember closing my eyes, praying, and just, before I knew it, the words were coming out, and I said, I can't, Dr. Sarah, I can't. I knew I was at peace with it. I knew my God was at peace with it. And I think it was one of the first major decisions I made with no consideration of anyone else. I knew that I needed to be the best mother that I could be to the children I had.
I was just not in a place where I could physically or emotionally handle a pregnancy, let alone a child. I was just in a position where I felt absolutely trapped and terrified, and I just would not have been able to handle it.
Even then, I knew that this wasn't the life that I wasn't myself yet. I wasn't whole. I wasn't ready to be a good parent.
Ours to Tell, just a clip from that. Renee Bracy Sherman, talk about who the people are in the film, and also storytelling as a form of resistance.
Absolutely. So Brittany and Yolanda are 2 Black moms raising their children who had abortions. Hannah is a Mexican woman, and Nick is a Houston trans person living in Houston, talking about the resistance and the power of trans people having abortions. And I think storytelling is extremely important in this time when we have the president going to the March for Life, denigrating us. We have the Secretary of Education denigrating Black people who have abortions. Our voices need to be heard, and we are speaking out that we had abortions. We're making this decision for ourselves, and that's what's most important.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Renee Bracy Sherman, award-winning activist, founder, and executive director of We Testify, executive producer of the new short film Ours to Tell, which is also produced by Planned Parenthood. You can see the full film at ourstotell.org. And that does it for our first broadcast from Park City, from the Sundance Film Festival. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Dina Guzder, Nermin Sheikh, Carla Wills, Tammy Warrenoff, Libby Rainey, Sam Alcoff, John Hamilton, Ravi Karen, Hani Masood, Tarina Nadura, Tamarie Astudio, Adriano Contreras, and Maria Terracena. Mike DeFilippo, Miguel Noguera, our engineers. Special thanks to Dennis Moynihan and Becca Staley. Hugh Grant. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.